honored to be able to serve all of you and your companies. There's some tremendous leaders in this group. I'm looking around and it's kind of humbling to think about what we do and how we got here. There's not a day goes by we're not grateful. And part of that story is the predictive index. And I'll never forget the day they reached out to Lisa and we're looking for a partner in Houston, and I'm just blessed that we were on the other end of that line. The one thing that PI has always done that it's aligned very close to who we wanted to be is that they're in a constant state of trying to make the tool better and to make, and just like they're saying, make work better, or make the world better at work. And that's something we believe in. And when Perform hit the market and we got to see it for the first time, we were really excited. It solves probably one of the biggest problems that we've heard you all talk about is performance management. How do I get my leaders at every level of the organization take the power of PI and use it on a day-to-day to help with engagement, performance management, goal setting, rewarding, things like this. And I just think PI has really done a great job answering the call. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Matt. So we were very blessed to put this together. So internally, and I think it even says it on his bio, Dr. Matt Poepsel, he's a vice president at the Predictive Index. He's known amongst the office as the godfather of talent optimization. So the talent optimization and the dashboard, the things that you know of PI, Dr. Matt had a heavy hand in that. Obviously, he's a PhD. He's a former Marine. We just talked about that. And all around, he's an expert at what we're about to discuss. So with that being said, Dr. Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll get in the sidecar. Lisa will be manning the chat if you've got some questions or anything. And we're recording this, so you'll get copies of it after the fact. With all ado, Dr. Matt, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate that. And thank you, Lisa, for hosting me as well. And I'm so excited to be chatting with everybody today. Smiling faces. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen here if I can. Beep, boop, beep. That's my screen share noise. All right, there we go. So yeah, so we're going to talk a lot about leadership, and the reason is because we really need to. Can we just be honest for a second? I think when you think about what's happening in the world of work, we're facing these unprecedented types of challenges. What we're starting to see more than ever is when you see these concepts or these headlines talking about managers being burned out. We know that the level of mental well-being and the challenge, the stress that workers are experiencing is as high as we've ever seen it. Disengagement kind of tends to go up and down. Right now it's down. And a lot of times when I'm talking to executives, they say, well, who's doing this to these people? And I think, what do you mean who's doing this to these people? We know who's doing it. There's a lot of change that we've been going through. Some of it was unwanted, back in 2020, but a lot of it has been trying to take advantages of either shifting business models, trying to meet different consumer tastes. We're talking about technological innovation. There's all kinds of great things and hopes and dreams we have for our business, but it's coming at the expense of our people if we don't do it the right way. When you see the top CEO concerns kind of in the middle, it's always on the executive agenda talking about leadership capacity. But I don't know if in my career I've ever seen it to the extent now where I see this gigantic disconnect between what executives believe is needed in sort of level down leadership and what those level down leaders themselves are experiencing. I've never seen a shift of these two tectonic plates, one in the form of the executives who are looking to affect change very quickly. They're weary of some of the different types of stalls that had taken place in the economy, and they want to really start changing the organization in many ways to take advantage of it. But you have a workforce in the terms of individual contributors and maybe first-line managers who are absorbing all this change still, and they're going through trying to adjust in some cases to remote and hybrid work. We're just rife with challenges. And that middle of the organization, as Brandon talked about, the managers that we need to make everything go, they're kind of caught in being squeezed between these two plates, so to speak. There's a lot of friction. And so I think that part of what we wanted to talk about today is what is it that helps us get through all of this and to navigate. It is leadership. Leadership is essential to being able to navigate this. And so far, I haven't shared with you anything that you don't already know, but I just wanted to put down that framework, that foundation, if you will, about where all this is coming from. So some of this has always been a challenge. Leadership has never been easy in any environment, but some of it's also brand new. And so what I wanted to share with you, and this might be a little bit newer, is this concept of having to redefine what leadership performance even means. I'm sure you've had rubrics inside your organizations about what leadership is supposed to look like. You might have something as formal as competency models. You might have something a little bit more informal. There's certainly a reputation that leaders have about who's high performance. By definition, in your organization, half of your leaders are below average, right? That's just statistics. But what is it that makes somebody an above average leader? Let's try to put a fine point on it. And I'll share with you that in my research and in my experience, it comes down to these four things we see on the screen. The first is driving results. That has always been the case. If a leader can't put up the results, they're not much of a leader. We've known that forever. Engaging others. I would say certainly for the last 2 decades, we've known about the relationship between employee engagement and employee performance, and in terms of retention. So employee engagement is something that, there's a lot of theories about it. It waxes, it wanes, all these kinds of things, but it's not a new part of the conversation. When you see that third one of encouraging well-being, that's new. We didn't used to talk about that. That wasn't a requirement of our leaders up until certainly the pandemic started this, where people had their values juggled and reprioritized. They renegotiated, at least in their own minds, what role they wanted work to play in their lives. And I'm talking about it like it's the third person, but we all went through this. Some of us are still going through this. I know I'm still going through this. The point, though, here is that when we saw the post-pandemic worker starting to show up to work and have some really deep-seated questions about well-being, and the other is the entrance of Gen Z into the workforce, who said, you know what, we've made all these advances and we've got all this technology. Shouldn't we also be able to have a life? In which case, boomers and Gen X people like myself said, oh, what are you talking about? Why would you want a life? We're here to talk about work. And it's being absorbed a lot differently, right? So I would say encouraging well-being, that is new, and that's something that we're trying to reconcile now. The last one, when we talk about growing future leaders, we've always talked about the need to have leadership development, but now it's taking on a different form. So I would say that it's existed, but it's changing. There's 2 reasons it's changing. One is because the nature of uncertainty, the speed of which we're trying to make changes, demands leadership capacity in ways that we could have gotten by without it before. I think it's been many decades since we used to have heavy investments in leadership development. Now, a lot of days we have the attitude of you come here trained, you don't come here to be trained. And it shows in the poor leadership that's often accompanying many organizations. The other thing is that the way that leaders who are coming into the organization now, early career leaders, want to be developed has changed. They're looking for more coaching and mentorship. They're looking for more direct feedback. I've seen research that says that Gen Z, for example, wants some form of recognition and affirmation as often as every 7 days. 7 days. I know a little bit about Gen Z. I made 3 of them with my bride, and it's different. It's different. And so when you have more established leaders who are further along in their careers, what we always have to remember about leadership is it's not about you. This is a huge paradox. It's not about what you were experiencing when you were 25 years old, because the world's entirely different now. So when everything has changed, we have to change as well. And we have to ask ourselves, are we prepared to modify our definition of leadership performance and to hold our leaders accountable? Because when we don't, we have more than just those headlines, right? Headlines are one thing, but think about what's happening in our organization. When the performance suffers, when engagement suffers, if well-being suffers, now all of a sudden we're seeing things like absenteeism, people calling out for mental health days, for example. Depending on your industry, that's a big deal, right? This is a challenge. And leadership helps insulate these things from happening in a very positive way. Now, what I want to do is have an audience poll for us here. I've got a Menti on the screen here. If you've got a magic phone, you can take a picture of that QR code. That's probably the fastest way to get yourself to the survey here. The other example is if you go to menti.com, menti.com, and you enter those 8 digits, you can go ahead and get there as well. And I tell you what, I'm also going to put it into the chat so that way you can just have a link. Let me go right to the chat here. Copy paste. There you go. If you just want to click on the link I just put in the chat, that will also work. I'm just looking for some answers to come in. So the question on the table, why do managers struggle to lead effectively? What keeps our managers from being able to do the 4 things that I shared on the screen that you see? And as those responses come in, I'll go ahead and share my screen and we'll chat through these a bit. All right. So the first one we have here around a lack of experience and training. It's so true. I think that a lot of times when we have our highly successful individual contributors, we say, you know what would be a great idea? Let's make this person a manager. And it comes from an intentional place. But 2 things happen. One is that we don't often ask them, do you want to be a manager? So a lot of them think, well, geez, if I want more money or if I want more influence in the organization, I guess I have to. The other is we don't necessarily train them, which is a challenge. We don't assume, we assume that they are going to figure it out. And there's a real performance dynamic that happens where they were a high performing individual contributor and now they're a very weak leader or weak manager. And that's tough for some people. Next example here is lack of time, too busy to manage. And it's true. And what's unfortunate about that, if you combine that with the first one, with a lack of experience or lack of training, they actually create more problems that end up taking up even more of their time. So there's this kind of a relationship between some of these answers that we're seeing. But yes, lack of time is really challenging. Again, especially when we're starting to see that what I've seen referred to as unrealistic expectations by executives about how fast things should take or how much resourcing. We haven't changed our appetite of what we want done, but we have restricted in an era of more efficient operation, the resources available to do it. And all that's landed on the manager's plate in particular, who are trying to protect their individuals, but still honor the executives. That's taking up a lot of their time and it's causing them a lot of challenges in the middle. They prioritize time above development and have trouble providing feedback in a constructive and meaningful way. I talk to a lot of managers who absolutely struggle with that. How do I provide feedback? I need this person to be motivated, not understanding that constructive feedback is exactly what people are hungry for. And so there's this disconnect that how do I start to have the conversation? Like I want to provide some corrective feedback here, something constructive, but how do I do that? I don't have the experience if you look at those first couple of answers. The fourth one here, when we talk about generational clashes, it is so true. We've never had 5 generations in the workforce the way we do now. People are living longer. People are working in different ways in terms of like part-time, for example. But there's also a very pronounced difference between the different generations. And a lot of times what I see is that what we'll call Boomer and Gen X values around work ethic, around the role of work, the attitudes about how we should even think about work are not necessarily the same. Big news flash for everybody on the call. Not necessarily the same as what Gen Z is showing up with. And it's not that they don't have a work ethic, but we've raised them to be very smart and to be shrewd and to ask questions. And there are differences in how they show up. And there's also differences in their values about there's been a real reaction, for example, against hustle culture. And it's interesting to see how it's starting to change that cultural landscape, as the respondent had said there. They forget what it was like to be where that employee is at the moment. So again, yeah, it's like now that I've moved on, I've matriculated up. That's one. I'll move through these a little bit more quickly. But inability to have crucial conversations, so that showed up. And then how about setting goals and holding the team accountable? Goal setting is absolutely essential. Goals are directive, they're energizing when done right. Many times you also find managers who lack goal hygiene. If they even get around to setting a goal, maybe even writing it down, do they stick with it? Really challenging. And no training from IC to manager. We've talked about that a little bit. I think goals and the other part about holding a team accountable, I hear that all the time. Why can't my people be more accountable? And I think, well, I ask, what's the last major decision you let your team make? And they're like, well, no, we're not going to let them make those decisions. Like, come on. And you're like, okay, great. So when we talk about accountability, it also comes with managerial responsibility. We have to do our part before we can hold others accountable. That's what leadership's all about. Dealing with burnout themselves, it's so true. And I feel like the nature and the danger of the health concerns that we have related to burnout are just now being understood. We're only starting to realize that in this massive shift toward hybrid and remote work, that it's creating this sense of isolation and loneliness that we hadn't expected to come with it. So you find many times workers are like, I want flexibility. I want to work from home. That's going to come at a cost. And people don't always realize that. So ultimately, how we experience burnout and how we're processing these types of issues, really, really important. So we've seen lack of time, lack of empathy, understanding of the positions everyone should that they have. So empathy is the number one trait. If you ask individual contributors, even first level managers, about what they're looking for from bosses, from managers, empathy is what it is. Can't you see what I'm going through? Do you take an active interest in my life, my experience of work, these types of things? Do you care? Or are you treating me like a cog in a machine, the way that we teach you in business school? We talk all about strategy and technology and operations. We almost act as if businesses don't have people. Well, no wonder our managers are coming out of MBA programs and being like, oh, I just read this thing and I know exactly, and not realizing that this allure of making everything hyper efficient and technologically advanced has to be balanced with the human element. Every business is a people business, from heavy industry to Silicon Valley, everything in between. Every business is a people business. So, I'm going through these because these are your answers. I'm honoring, what you've shared today. I really appreciate you sharing these insights because it's so true. And I know they're from a collective of different types of companies, but these situations, I'm sure you look at these answers and you're like, yep, we're seeing that here too. Yep, that's happening in my shop, right? Because these are these evergreen type or these very persistent type things. All right. Let me go back to the poll. Now, here's what I am going to recommend. The way to solve these problems that you've highlighted is that we have to be able to inject the people practices into the mechanics of work. So I've got this colorful picture here. I guess I'm not a car guy, but I guess this is like fuel injection or something that's being illustrated. And I'm trying to point out here that the mechanics of work, when you think about the strategy, the goals, the operations, the process, machinery, anything you've got, we need that. We have to have that. We can't build scalable, efficient businesses without it. But the people practices are every bit as important. But it's not as if we do these two things separately. How many times have you seen a training where you have some breakthroughs because you took managers into a classroom environment, you took them out of the work, they had some really great stuff, but then they go back to work and it's almost like they never went in the first place. It just wears right off. The point is that we can't go and say, well, in the morning, I'm going to do people stuff. And then in the afternoon, I'm going to do worky work stuff. It's like, no, that misses the opportunity to really inject and bring those two together. That's where everything begins to change. And with that as a backdrop, this is where I want to bring up what Brandon had shared, which was the PI Perform tool. Now, before I do, I'm going to give you a quick disclaimer here in that I don't know your businesses the way that Brandon and Lisa do. I don't have the opportunity to give you a fully personalized demonstration of Perform the way I would prefer to, because we're in a group environment here. But with that disclaimer, I do want to give us a couple of foundational parts. And Brandon and Lisa also told me these are PI experienced people. They want the good stuff, the advanced stuff. So we're going to do that as well. But to give us some basics so we have a common foundation, I'm going to go ahead and start with that. Okay. What we're seeing on the screen is, for some of you, it might be your first view of the Perform module from Predictive Index. Now, in this case, I'm demonstrating from the viewpoint of Lisa. Lisa's our manager. Let's assume that Lisa has some of the challenges that you shared in the Menti poll. She has been appointed. She hasn't necessarily been trained. She may lack empathy. She may be busy herself. She may have all those types of things. Well, in this case, what we're looking at on the screen, if you look on the right-hand side, you see that Lisa's got a series of meetings coming up. She's got one-on-ones with her team. She has a team of 5 people, and these are the one-on-ones she has. Now, the reason that the software knows that is because there's an integration with her calendar, her Google Calendar, her Microsoft Teams calendar, whatever calendar system that she as a manager uses. So it has looked inside of her calendar and said, here are the one-on-ones you have with people coming up, so she can actually be prepared. There is almost nothing more powerful in a manager's toolkit than a one-on-one meeting. And what I find is that on average, managers are exceptionally bad at running one-on-one meetings because they don't adhere to the best practice of making sure that the employee owns the agenda, that there's a chance to weigh in ahead of time before the meeting so that they're prepared to have the conversation, or these types of things. So in this case, knowing that the calendar has brought in, hey, these are the upcoming one-on-one meetings, that's an important part of what Perform is able to do. In the middle, we see action items. So being able to use a performance management system, as Brandon said, to say, what are the things that we're working on in the business? I don't want to just focus on people, but at the same time, I do recognize that there's a mechanic aspect to it. There's projects we're working on, for example, there's to-dos to be done. So I can track them here, and all the things you would expect from a productivity tool around due dates and assignments and attachments and all those kinds of things are there. But where I want to start showing you some of the more important parts for ourselves as PI practitioners is that now, for the first time, in this case, Lisa, you can see at the top of the screen that Lisa's a captain. And as a captain, she may or may not have been to a PI workshop recently. She may or may not know what being a captain even is, but she's managing a persuader, right? In this case, Eliza, her direct report, is a persuader. And if I look on the right-hand side, then I can see, for example, if I'm Lisa, that Eliza is a persuader who's risk-taking, wants to talk it out, needs variety, wants to be able to drive. That's great. But to be able to expand that out a little bit more, now all of a sudden, not having to fumble through her desk looking for a behavioral report, perhaps that she received when, in this case, Eliza had first started working for her, or maybe that she had had a readback at some point. It's right in the context of the same way that she's going to have a conversation with Eliza about her deliverables. So now all of a sudden, think about what we're trying to do. PI creates this common language across an organization. Everybody has behavioral insights and access. And now that same information they need, because it's going to show up in the work that they do together, is now right at their fingertips in the same tool that they use to do their work together. So in this case, as she's looking, saying, yeah, her strengths are around driving change and she's motivating and stimulating, but what about her caution areas? What about may provide limited follow-up or attention to detail? I'm a persuader myself, so that really resonates with me. It's probably why I highlighted it. But in this case, knowing that that's a potential caution area and having that at the tip of my brain as we're having a one-on-one or we're talking about the status of our meetings, that's powerful. That's how we're starting to inject those people practices into the context and the flow of the day-to-day work. So those behavioral insights right at my fingertips are a powerful thing for managers to have. And it's really just the beginning. When you look at what's happening here in terms of the agenda, what you didn't see is that an email went out to Eliza and Lisa the day before saying, prepare for your one-on-one. It's going to be tomorrow. Make sure you register the topics you want to talk about. And that's a best practice. And that's what we have to ask ourselves. Are our managers doing and having the hygiene of honoring the one-on-one meeting with their direct report? Are they soliciting them for input? Because there's empowerment there, there's ownership, and then there's accountability there about come to me with the things that you want to talk about. That's a great practice. Now here, when I'm in the actual meeting and I'm starting to see that in this case, Eliza has said, what do you like to do in your free time? Being a persuader, that's a question that I could see. Wanting to do some relationship building, that's great. We can talk about that. We can reorder them. We can do whatever we'd like. And the point being is that when I start the meeting, for example, we're going to talk about different things and we advance through our conversation, you can see on the right-hand side, there's ability to add notes, to add action items, to assign to-dos, all of the good meeting hygiene stuff that's supposed to take place. We now have a system of record. We have a system that has ongoing notes. So think about this way. If I'm Lisa, and let's say we have an annual performance review process, and I get a note from the HR team that says, hey, it's time to do your annual review. How has Eliza's performance been over the last 12 months? She says, oh my gosh, 12 months. I can't remember the last 3 weeks. Like you have this recency bias that shows up because we don't have that ongoing notes. And I can't do the developmental themes over the long term without a system to help me do that. So when you take notes like what the system's allowing us to do, you're telling the other person, I care. Here comes that empathy. Hey, last time we talked about how you had a big presentation coming up. I want to know, how did that go? Right? Well, these types of things humanize our experience together at the same time that they're driving performance and development. So the system at this point, what we've talked about is that we've had a chance to weigh in on items ahead of time. We discuss them live in the meeting. When the meeting closes, we both get an email notification about what was discussed, and it continues to live in the system so we can do our work there asynchronously until our next meeting. And that's pretty great. So this is all we've been talking about is in the context of a one-on-one meeting. The same is true for group meetings. We could have the entire group, let's say that the 5 people are having a team meeting, they would each get the email, hey, team meeting tomorrow. What do you want to talk about? Let's make sure we put in the agenda. Let's build it together before we show up. Let's take our notes live. Let's all get a copy of the notes live. Let's have our to-do items, our to-do actions tracked and checked. So all this good hygiene about how to run more effective meetings, but importantly, to do it with the behavioral insights in mind. That's the key differentiator here. Very, very possible. Now, in the case of the relationship guide, as an example, being able to see that for Lisa and Eliza together, how are we similar? How are we different? How might that show up in our work? Again, the average manager, even for you at a PI client, doesn't always think about PI and the relationship side and how it is either helping or hurting their work together with others. And now it's right here, one click away, being able to see that I see, this is me, this is you, this is how we compare to one another. This might be what's happening, right? And having a conversation about it, sometimes negotiating our differences, really, really important. So in this case, what we're talking about is around how we do our work together. Let's talk about some of that feedback that we mentioned a little bit earlier, the need for recognition. There's 2 types of ways that in Perform we can do this. One is through something informal and light called a kudo. We can put a fun animated GIF, just quick little shout out, something like that. That might be a great fit for your culture. Or maybe you have something where you want something a little more rigorous. Remember when we talked about having those crucial conversations, those difficult, constructive conversations? Let's pick up on that use case from the mentee, because I think that's probably even a better one. In this case, being able to leave feedback and to understand how it is, how does that actually happen? Where does that come from? Let me show you an example of a tool that we've created that has this power of artificial intelligence to help managers get a head start. In this case, I'm Lisa. Let's say that I'm suffering from what you said in the mentee poll, which is I'm uncomfortable having a constructive conversation. I see that Eliza has strengths around creativity and around flexibility, being a persuader. That's probably not surprising, but I need to have a tough conversation with her about her organizational skills and some of her details. Again, maybe not surprising to us as PI practitioners, but this is really important that this is what happens. Okay. So now all of a sudden, when I go to the next, now the system is saying, okay, let me help you get started. Let me put some words in your mouth. You can always change them, but let me just get you going. And so we have 3 different options here that Lisa can choose as a starting point. Again, just a starting point, and says, you know what, I've read it and I think this is the one I want to modify. I want to modify this one and go ahead and start off here. So in this case, your creative ideas, your willingness to adapt, great asset to the team. And I can type over this and make this, our product team or whatever it might be. And then it says, however, I've noticed sometimes important details and organizational tasks can fall through the cracks. And now Lisa's thinking like, oh, that's a good way to open that. All right. So I started with whatever it might be. And I can add some more specifics. I had to ask you twice about the bug report on the thing, the piece of software, whatever it might be. So this is a place that what we find is when we talk to managers, they say, if you can just help me get started, I can go ahead and send that feedback. And when they send the feedback directly from within the system, then we have a history ongoing. It'll be there for us when we start to look back over that year to do a big old performance review and saying, oh, that's right. I was coaching her pretty hard in the first half of the year when it came to details and follow-up. But in the second half, I noticed that got a lot better. So she's coachable. Like that's what's going to show up in that review. So that's a much more positive and appropriate way of providing a full kind of a 12-month view of what that might be. At the same time, that we're talking about how these Gen Z people, I'll say it like that. Like I said, I've certainly had experience raising some, want all this feedback. The truth is that managers need feedback too. How often do you think your managers are getting feedback unsolicited from their direct reports of saying, can I just give you here's where you're doing great, here's where you're not doing so great? Not as often as they would like. There's actually a request feedback capability as well. So if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, when I click this request feedback button, the feedback request gets sent, in this case, to Eliza from Lisa saying, hey, Lisa's requested some feedback from you. Just take a quick minute to tap it in and send it back to her. So I didn't have to wait for the next meeting. I didn't have to wait 2 weeks or whatever it might be. There's this mechanism to get the feedback and solicit it. Again, whether it's one-on-one, like I just showed, or whether it's for a group. Can you imagine the power of a team leader saying to their team of 8 people that they have a regular meeting with, hey, I'm looking for some feedback about how I'm running these team meetings? What does the employee think? This person cares what I think. What a powerful message to humanize what's otherwise a very technical aspect of business. They care about my opinion. And all of a sudden, if the feedback comes in and we start to react to it, now it's even better. It's even more collaborative and participative, which is the type of environment that people increasingly want to work in. So again, feedback can be shared at the all company level. You could have a way and set this up with different types of integrations to say, I want a feedback shared in a certain way to show to the whole company through our Microsoft Teams integration. Okay, we could talk about that. No problem. Those things are possible. Or I just want to share this privately with my group, or I just want to share this privately with the one person. All those options are totally available and totally important, right? I'll show you just one last thing real quickly, because I know we could talk about Perform all day. And this is an example of goals. So when that, it showed up in the Menti as well, that managers don't always know how to set goals or have good goal hygiene. When you go to create a goal, for example, being able to choose specific due dates, who's the owner of goals, make sure that they're clearly aligned with owners, that they have specific end dates. I'll show you another example here of looking into an existing goal, for example, saying that we have due dates, we've got owners, we've got progress, and progress could be in the form of percentages or dollar attainment or completion of sub milestones. We can link goals, for example, to either higher order goals if we're doing like a company cascade or a department cascade or something like this. And we can also track all of our action items or any notes related to the goal. So the reason this is important, if you were to approach me or Brandon or Lisa and saying, we're having a performance problem in this part of our business, our dashboard has red or yellow lights, we wish they were green. We're going to ask, what is the goal? Can you show it to me? Right? What is the nature of the people pursuing that goal? Are there natural fits or gaps between what we're asking them to do? And if it's a team, what's the team type relative to the team goal? And if the manager can't show us all those things, then they're completely taking chances. We haven't given them the scaffolding they need to be able to do all the things that we didn't train them to do from the Menti poll, right? It's just how it is. So at this point, how do we hold our managers accountable if we don't give them the tools to do the things that we tell them they need to do, which is balance the people part with the business part, the technical part, right? This is an example of how we can do that. And there's other ways of providing this. Now, what I haven't showed you yet is that for the people on this call, you are the champions, the PI champions. And there's an ability to be able to go into these views and start looking at the admin consoles and trying to understand who are these different types of who are the managers who are using things, for example, who's taking the actions, which team members, for example, how often am I meeting with them? Am I having one-on-ones with my team? Am I providing feedback or goals? You get to see who's using the right management techniques in your company so you can be surgical in your interventions. My marketing team's doing a great job. My product team's not. They need a phone call. They need some training from me. It puts you into this view of places that you haven't been able to get into before. So one of the ways I like to say that is that the system, especially if you go back, and I'll take us all the way back to the beginning, where when I'm in a relationship guide and all of a sudden Eliza's complaining about her managerial relationship with Lisa and you're a PI champion, this is the information you would be whispering into her ear if you were in the room, but you can't be in all the rooms and you can't be in all the Zooms. This is a set of scaffolding that allows the PI insights to sidle up right next to the work being done. That's the part that's the most powerful here. So with that as the backdrop, I'm going to take us back to the presentation real quick, and then I'm going to honor what I had said earlier about using taking a look at some advanced cases. So everything I showed you was within a Chrome browser and my choice, but in Zoom this is also possible. There's an integration, for example, that has the same things that we looked at. How do I put in my agenda items ahead of time? How do I pull them up live on the Zoom? How do we walk through it together as a team? How do we capture our action items and our to-dos? How do I look at the behavioral profiles of different individuals? All possible from within Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, whatever it is that you're using. We don't want managers to have to leave the tools of doing day-to-day work to do the behavioral things. That's the point. We want it always to be right at their fingertips. And there's integrations additionally with other tools that I'm sure you recognize based on what you're using in your company, whether it's Asana for project management, whether it's tools like HubSpot and Salesforce. If you want to do deal coaching, for example, and your sales team is like, I want to provide some behavioral coaching based on your PI profile and how it's showing up in your pipeline. Like if that's of interest, those are the types of things you can do, and certainly Slack and other types of communication tools. All right, with that as a backdrop, I do want to show you some PI advanced use cases, and then we'll have time for some questions as well. Talent optimization, you know it well. Nobody gets to pass from business strategy to business results without going through the people part, right? How do we design winning teams, hire top talent, inspire people to greatness, and diagnose people problems so we can get them fixed? I want to show you how every one of those things can be made better with Perform. So this is an example of an employee survey, an employee engagement survey, I should say. This one's the one from PI, the XP survey. Now, if you're a manager and you got this score, a 68, lowest score on the board, basically what we're saying is your team doesn't like you. That's a tough message for a young manager. But my question is, where and how will they take advantage of the prescriptive actions that either you would recommend, or certainly the PI toolset has recommended? And the point is that if we give them a PDF full of these prescriptive actions, you know what happens to it, right on the hard drive, right in the file drive, right in the desk drawer, whatever it is. And it doesn't get resurfaced. But in this case, if I'm logged into Perform and I have an item, for example, with a recurrence, meaning that I could set it to show up for me every 4 weeks, I want to be reminded, and I'll just click into it. It has prescriptive items from the XP survey that says, here are things you can do when your item from your team says, I believe my manager is there for me when I need their help or support was low. And Lisa, the captain, is like, what? What are you talking about? Well, here it is. Look at action number 2. Understand your personal communication preferences, whatever it might be. So this can totally be individualized for the manager who got whatever score they got on whatever part of the engagement survey. They would almost have to try to ignore the fact that you've put the how to get better right in their face in the same system that they're using to manage the flow of the business. The behavioral actions are being reminded to them each time in whatever way that you'd like to set it up for them. So that's powerful because then it doesn't become an afterthought. It's part of the flow of natural business. In this case, if we had a different situation, let's say Lisa was down here bottom left corner. This is an example of a team configuration. We have a lot of people, a lot of emphasis strategically in that top right innovation, and we have one person doing it. Well, there were 3 people at one time, but 2 quit. One took a different job in the company, another one left the company altogether. So now it's like, I better hold on to that person who's in that top right quadrant. Well, if that relationship gets strained, inside Perform, what we could do is bring up something like the manager strategy guide. Again, once a month, I want that manager strategy guide to be right at the fingertips of these 2 people and saying, hey, look, this is your management strategy guide during our one-on-one together. Will you take a look at these and pick one for us to talk about? And Eliza says, yeah, how about this one? You know, providing me with a high level goal, but letting me achieve it my own way. Last Thursday, we were in a meeting and you didn't do that. I came up with an idea and you shot it down immediately. And that didn't feel good to me. Oh, I'm so glad we're having this conversation because if we hadn't, we know what happens, right? So this is an example from Inspire where it's like an Inspire tool like Manager Strategy Guide is one of the most powerful tools I've ever seen for inexperienced managers who don't get the training, don't feel they have the time. But does the average manager know or even think to pull up the Manager Strategy Guide and use it on a regular basis? They don't. But do they have a system that reminds them to do it? Now they do, right? So this is what's going to change. Remember, going back to the beginning, how do I drive performance, engagement, well-being, and grow future leaders? You've got the tools, but the tools have to get into places where they're needed the most. If we stick with the teams for a second, inside the design module, we have a team summary. I love the team summary because it's got this great lengthy report. And here in this case of having a product team meeting, for example, if we have an item that was identified by the system and the tools that says conflict resolution can be an issue for this team, and it says reevaluate your processes, and I can say as the team leader, look, the PI tool set had said for our type of team pursuing our type of strategy, this could become an issue. I just want to know, do we need to have a conversation about this? Again, the feeling for the team members is totally different than it was before. Now it's like, yeah, you know what we do? There's been some conflict and I don't think we've handled it in the most constructive way. I'm glad we're having this conversation. That's what I want your managers to say time and again. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. Because right now those conversations aren't happening. And when they don't happen, then we don't have a chance to make them better. And the last example I'll give you comes from hiring. So if we have a new hire, for example, in this case, being able to pull up something like the personal development chart and being able to say, you know what, look at these self-coaching tips on the bottom. The very last one says, come to situations and meetings prepared to contribute. Will, I don't know you very well. We just talked during the interview process, but PI says that this is a self-coaching tip for you. I have a question. Do you have any meetings coming up? And are you prepared to contribute, or is there something I can do to help you? All of a sudden, that new employee is saying, I feel seen, I feel heard. We can use the lingo of Gen Z today and say, understand who I am as a person. It's okay for me to be who I am as a person. And you're helping me complement things that might not be natural strengths or might not have even occurred to me. That's powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. Now, what I have on the screen for you, I'm going to ask you to do this. Help me out here. This is an example of characteristics I see across hundreds of clients that I've identified as being particularly needing the types of techniques that you highlighted in the Menti, offsetting some of those issues, as well as that I showed in the Perform example. And I want you to count up to these 11 you see on the screen and just let's head to the chat. I'm going to pull up my chat right now and just tell me how many of these pertain or tally up for your organization. So just, and while you're counting, I'll give you real quick. When we talk about remote or hybrid, and how there's this distance and this isolation, loneliness happening. We talk about Gen Z. If you have a lot of Gen Z workers, they need a more participative style, like what we've been talking about. If you do a lot of collaboration, if you're going through massive change, or if you were similar to that Menti poll that said our leaders just don't have a ton of experience. Like if I said all five, that'd be 5 total points. Keep going. What about in the talent optimization gaps? Are we missing targets, those red lights in our dashboard somewhere? Maybe we got friction. Maybe we got low engagement scores from whatever tool we're using. Turnover, obviously a problem. And as I mentioned, absenteeism, people are calling out, man. They're calling out like they never used to. And then the last one for yourselves as PI champions, do you find that your managers struggle to use PI every day? Are they remembering to use the tools that you've given them? Or are they saying, I'm busy with other things. I just didn't think about it. So I'm gonna give you a second, count up to 11 here. And then just let me know in the chat, just so I know kind of where the teams are coming from so I can tailor my comments. And we'll have time for Q&A. I promise I'm just about done here. All right, thank you. I see a 6, yeah. Somebody once told me 12. I thought, what? They said, we have other stuff you're not even talking about yet. 8, yeah, 8's good, yeah. Yeah, and it can be a mix, right? Maybe we have some of the workplace and some of the gaps, yeah. A couple more, yeah. 6, 8, 9, yeah. Cool, awesome. Well, you can keep them coming if you're still counting. That would be great. I'll move us forward. So, Brandon, we got a little bit of time for Q&A as well. This is how I like to think about Perform, because obviously PI has had a lot of capabilities for a long time. I see Perform as an extension of everything we've always done. So being able to say, I've always had great insights and reports. I've always created awareness through data, but now being able to get it to my managers through a tool that they'll be happy to use every day because it actually gives them back time. It makes things faster. So it makes it so that they can do all the things leaders must do in a way that actually makes them more efficient. And there's plenty of research and evidence that indicates that when we start developing the agency and the capabilities of our people, they bring us fewer issues. If I schedule a one-on-one and they know that, oh, I'm going to talk to them on Thursday anyway, I won't bug that manager because I know I'm going to be talking to them. I'm just going to add it to Perform. That saved a 15-minute derailment when they say, I'm just going to put it in Perform. We'll talk about it during our one-on-one. And I, as the employee, feel like I know we're going to talk about it because we always do. I'm perfectly content to wait 2 days to have that conversation. That's not happening today. So then you get the interrupt. And how many times your managers go through interrupt after interrupt, they can't get any sort of efficiency or any thinking work done. And then we're mad at them for not thinking. No, we got to change this a little bit, okay? And I want everybody who's come to the conversation today to get value. So there's a tip sheet I've created all about one-on-one meetings, team meetings, giving feedback. Brandon, Lisa, and I will get this off to you in your follow-up materials. So you're going to get the tip sheet. I encourage you to share it with your managers because for all the reasons you said in the Menti, these things don't come naturally to them. And they can use it as a scorecard. You use your little check boxes. Go down the side and say, do you do these things? How'd you do? Like, what do you want to work on next? It's a great developmental tool. Simple tips like this go so far because, again, the managers just don't know how to do it. So you'll get that in your follow-up and definitely encourage you to share that with leaders at every level. So that's it. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so I can open up for Brandon and see smiling faces, and we'll answer questions about anything I've covered today, whether it's the world of work or leadership or certainly Perform, all that good stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Fantastic. We do got a couple questions in the chat. I'll just take those in order.
Yeah.
We'll start there. The first one is, we already have a separate system for goals in our HRIS. Could we utilize the other functions but disable the goals so our leaders' employees don't get confused?
You can use the other functions. As far as disabling it, I don't believe that's possible today, but I don't think it'll be too hard to tell them don't use that for now. The question becomes, which is more likely, that the fact that they'll be confused about the goals being like listed, but we don't use that system, we actually use something else, or that they'll not have the one-on-ones and do the types of things. So we can look with our product team to see if that's something that we can look into. I don't believe that's a capability today, though, being 100% transparent about that.
Thanks, Dr. Matt. Another question here is, on average, how much time does a team manager need to invest weekly to properly implement PI Perform?
To implement the first thing that they should do is connect it to their calendar. So it takes 60 seconds or less. And then to make sure that they are creating or enabling, I should say, the one-on-one and team meetings that they want. That's pretty much the setup. After that, it's mostly just encouraging them to use it. What we find is that managers, even persuaders like myself, end up really appreciating the tool. So there's no implementation to be had, especially if what we're using it for is the one-on-one meetings. If you get into some of the more advanced aspects of how you create specific templates, like you might want to create templates for certain types of feedback, that might be a little bit different. But for everything I've showed you today, with the exception of goals, because it depends on if you've already got goals in hand, you just need to tap them in, or if they're actually doing goal setting, that can take a little bit longer. But I would say the biggest bang for the buck for me to get started in terms of behavioral insights, the one-on-one meetings and the feedback. And there's no setup required for that other than connecting your Google or Microsoft Calendar.
All right, we have another question. It says, "I love the kudos feature.
Me too.
Are those are those kudos about to be shared with the whole company through PI, or are they only visible on the one-on-one agenda?"
Yeah, it's user's choice. So for example, if I have a one-on-one piece of feedback I want to share privately, I can keep it so that's the visibility level. If I want to make it just my team or just my department, those are groups also in Perform. So I could just have visibility at that level, or I could choose whole company. And if I'm a company of 150 people, let's say, and I want everybody to know that Eliza did a great job on this thing, I would use that option. And it could be, remember, it could be piped right into a Slack channel or a Microsoft Teams channel if that's where you do a lot of your company communications. So you can build some really great recognition that way. So to answer the question, the user sets the visibility when they're creating the one-on-one is basically by the context. If I'm in a group and I leave feedback, the whole group will see it. If that group happens to be the whole company's group, then the whole company will see it. If I'm just in my private one-on-one meeting, then just the one other person will see it.
That's great. Does anybody else have a question that wasn't in the chat? Or here we go. It says, "How do you think employees would respond to AI generated feedback?" That's a
Yeah,
good
it depends.
question.
I think the first thing that I find is that they want feedback at all. What I know from the managers is once they get the hang of it, they tend to not necessarily need it as much. A lot of times it's really trying to figure out how to broach that conversation in the first place. As far as, employees giving feedback, I don't, we're kind of so early days with AI right now. It's funny, I teach graduate level leadership, and there's AI that the students are using, and there's AI the university is using to try to defeat the AI from the students. And the same is happening with job people and ATS systems. It's like, it's kind of all shaking out, to be honest. I think they recognize that AI is being used. The most important thing is, can we please just get people the feedback that they need? And remember, a lot of times too, if I see a piece of feedback come in that was AI generated or otherwise, and I have a follow-up question, I put that in my note for the next one-on-one, and we're going to have a live conversation about it, right? I'm like, hey, I really appreciated what you shared with the feedback. You mentioned that I could be more detail-oriented, for example, and you mentioned the Johnson account. Can you tell me a little bit more on that? And they will. You've opened the door for feedback to happen in that case.
One thing that I'll add that I know many of you have heard Lisa and I talk about is the fact that, PI is a tool, right? Like it still needs you. It still needs you, the people champion. And I would say the AI generated content's the same way. It allows you to customize it. It allows you to put your rubber stamp on it. And I think the feedback ultimately is the most important, but also putting that personal touch is always important. If you're in the people game, that's what you want to do. I'm going to add something that we've been doing, and maybe this might spur a question. There's a lot of things that, and if you want to learn more about Perform, we can certainly dive deeper. Just let us know. But one of the things, we've been using this for about a month internally. And one of the things that we really, really love is as we go through our team meetings, we set action items. Those action items are assigned to me or Lisa, Elizabeth, Jackie, whoever is getting assigned on our team, and those are getting shot out to those people. So post meeting, I get a set of notes, but then I get my action items that's in a date, and it automatically pops up on my calendar. As I complete those, I get reminders. I can complete them. I check them off. That actually goes back to my boss, which is Lisa, and she's the higher A, so she likes to be in over that part of it. But what it really helps us do is to track, and it helps us keep each other accountable, because sometimes, like many of you experience, I can't get something I need done until my teammate does. And so there's that accountability function back and forth, and we really have enjoyed using that. It's really easy. It's taken us zero time and really no lift to get to integrate it into our meetings and in our day-to-day, really. I got another question here, Dr. Matt. Let me make sure I get to both of them. It says, just heard many sessions on AI at SHRM. They drove home the importance of artificial intelligence plus human intelligence. AI doesn't change what we do. It can change how we do it. Well said.
I'll build on that one real quickly, 1 second too, which is that the more technical our organizations get, and we're all friends here because you're all PI champions. I will tell you this: the larger the organization gets, the more technically adept it gets, the more dehumanized the work gets by default. What we have to do is we have to rehumanize our work. So the point is that if we're going to continue to escalate the use of AI and we're going to do these things because it makes our businesses more efficient, we absolutely need to do those things. But let's recognize that we're creating a backlash of hunger in our workers for the human touch. And so it has to be offset, all this escalating AI usage, for example, with more of the very human things that we've talked about on the call today. How do you show empathy? How do you recognize behavioral insights? How do you do a human thing like taking notes when someone else is talking? Like, these are very simple things that reinforce the humanity of our work to offset some of what we're talking about. So I also love that comment. Thank you.
Well said. I have another question. It says, where do you get the action item reminders, email, Teams, or PI portal? That's a great question.
Yeah, I get emails, for example, as well, because I use the system too, Brandon. And I get them when all of a sudden we're approaching a due date in my email. If I log in, so what I do is every day I log in, I can see they're organized by their due date. So I can just scan my list. So when I'm in Perform, I just scan my list. If I'm starting to run late on a due date, or certainly if I'm past a due date, then I get an email as a reinforcement. There's also integrations you can have with a project management tool like Asana or Slack. There's settings you can use to try to get those pings whenever and wherever you want them.
Yeah, ours is generally through email, but obviously Lisa and I are a little different. We're in the software every day. I've talked to many of you, and I fully understand. Even though you are the champion, you may not be in that dashboard every single day as you're solving problems. So it's really nice to have this way to bring PI to the forefront of any type of what I'll just call an organizational rub, whether it be, an action item that's late, or a relationship that's under strain, or just someone who's, as Dr. Matt said, they're kind of flailing for feedback and connection, and a sense of purpose in the organization. So I think that's really great. Is there any other?
I was going to just one other quick point. I didn't do it very much justice. I only showed it very quickly. But you can imagine if you had a dashboard in front of you right now that was unlike the traditional HR and other dashboards, and it showed you across the organization who's having one-on-ones with their team and how often, who's having the feedback that they're providing and how often, who's setting goals and keeping them up to date and how often. That's the type of people system visibility that you want. So the point is that managers find that as they use the tools, and Brandon, Lisa, you've experienced yourself, it's making your life easier because it's actually tracking the goals and these things. It's got the behavioral insights built in. But the side benefit is who needs your help. Who's a manager who got low engagement scores and who isn't using the feedback portion of the tool, and you can pull them aside in your regular one-on-one with them and say, look, you've got to be providing this type of feedback. You're not doing it, and you're creating potential problems for yourself because you thought you were busy now. If one of these people quits because they weren't getting the love from you and they can go get somewhere else in this competitive talent environment, you're really going to be busy, because not only are you going to be doing their work, you're going to be interviewing for their replacement. Like, you can't have that. So you need to use the tools we're giving you. Like, you can be surgical in your outreach as champions, which is really powerful.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Does anyone else have any other questions? There's been
Or
some great ones.
I'll just kind of pose out, is there anything, any feature or something in particular, when you first said, yes, I want to attend this webinar, is there something that you maybe are curious if it has this particular feature, or if there's something that Perform can help you do that maybe you didn't see here today? Does anyone have any feedback or questions for that in that regard?
Okay.
No?
Well, there were some great questions. I'll say it again on behalf of Lisa and myself. Thank you all so much for making the time to be here today. I can't stress enough how excited we are about PI Perform. I think one of the first webinars where we actually got to hear and see about it, the way it was characterized as this fills the gaps. PI is such a great tool. It can do so much from the front end to the back end of the employee life cycle. But people are dynamic, and so are organizations, and so the gaps this fill are really powerful, and it's something we're very excited about. Before everyone goes, I did have one last question that popped in. Oh yeah, Matt, you've already got it. It says it has lots of feedback tracking. Does it take into account the performance review? Yes, there are some export capabilities for that. So as we finish up, if you have any more questions, you want to take a deeper dive into Perform and talk a little more specific to your challenges in your business, just reach out to Lisa or myself. We'd be happy to get that scheduled and talk a little bit about your unique challenges. But as for today, Dr. Matt, thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
It was awesome to get to collaborate with you on this. Lisa and I are very grateful.
Thanks so much, team. Appreciate you. Let's go help some managers.
Have a great day.
Okay.
Yeah. Everyone be good.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.